Hello and welcome to the latest Manufacturing Management live panel event. My name's Chris Beck. I'm the editor of Manufacturing Management. Today's session is sponsored by digital transformation specialist Relaya. And I'm delighted to be joined by Relaya Director of Marketing and Portfolio, David Petrikat, live from Berlin, and Tim Figgers, who's the Director of Technology, Sustainability and Innovation at Make UK, a manufacturers organisation. During the disruption of the past couple of months, the majority of us across the globe have quickly had to adapt to an entirely new way of working, remote and heavily reliant on technology. For many manufacturers in particular, this has come as something of a shock, and many are now fighting to build long-term resilience for when they can begin operating again. In this moment of uncertainty, companies have an urgent need to develop robust recovery strategies, and that's something we'll be looking to answer today. How can companies become resilient enough to survive an economic downturn and then, even better, grow faster on the other side of it? One answer to this could be using a so-called as-a-service model, probably better known to many as servitisation. But for many manufacturers, this will be a relatively new concept. So David, could you explain what is meant by servitisation or an as-a-service model and its implication for manufacturers?
Sure. First of all, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and great for the opportunity to talk to you. Servitization is a big topic that we see around the globe emerging. I mean, we know it from B2C for a long time. So business to consumer, it's a very sad practice in a shared economy where we don't want to own assets, but just use them and get the output. And this trend is actually moving into the manufacturing space more and more. This is because production companies do see challenges in terms of forecasting the demand that they are producing for. So they want to be flexible in terms of their capacity, while they also would love to consume their equipment that they're using to produce the demand, you know, ideally at a per piece level. And this is what you would understand as fully as a service. You know, when you don't buy the asset and you don't own it and you don't care about the maintenance, you basically just pay per produced asset and per outcome. This is the I think the holy grail of as a service, but there are a lot of intermediate steps in between that companies can take to take advantage of recurring revenue streams that we also see as a very huge appetite in the market. And I think a great first step that manufacturers can take without the full exploration of as a service.
And Tim, like I said, the pandemic, the past few weeks and months have really kind of I suppose made a lot of manufacturers consider the way they operate, and especially when it comes to technology. I mean, we're using technology now in a way that's become second nature to many over the past few weeks. How has the pandemic and how is it going to change the way that manufacturers view technology and their mindset?
Well, I mean, I hope it will really give an impetus to something that manufacturers really needed to be thinking about anyway, which is digitalizing their processes, using technology and embracing the opportunities that the fourth industrial revolution or industry 4.0 can bring. But up until this crisis came along, the main reason we encouraged manufacturers to do that was to cut costs and improve productivity. But now the pandemic has shown a second reason why people should really take this agenda seriously, because a digital manufacturer is a more resilient manufacturer than one that is still relying on analog processes. And we've seen that at a very basic level, that manufacturers who put their office processes, had remote monitoring of factories and that sort of thing, were much more quickly able to adapt to the kind of remote working we've all been doing, certainly in the UK for nearly 10 weeks now, as compared to manufacturers who haven't made that investment in the past. And I think that experience is causing a lot of people now to take this agenda more seriously than they may have done before.
David, is that something you guys at Relaya are seeing?
Absolutely. And I think one of the most important things that we see, and we also we're advocating, you know, throughout of our existing, is to question the investment of technology in the right way. So it's not about, do I want to invest into the technology or not? It's about, why would I invest into it? And a lot of people just went digital for the sake of going digital. They made infrastructure investments, which are great. So now my machine has Wi-Fi, but what should I do with it? What's the business case behind it? And how do I monetize it? And now people do ask those questions, and now start from the other end, which is very important in the thought process of investing into technology. You know, what do I want to achieve? And ideally in a business context, in terms of my business case and my go-to-market, and what would I need in terms of technology to support this undergoing, and what would be the right sequence to invest into it. I don't need everything at once, you know, so what are my steps towards a successful digital journey? And those thought processes are accelerated throughout the situation that we find ourselves in. And I think one thing I really like is also within the manufacturing space, the mindset is not how do I reopen, but how do I restart? So what company do I want to build now, and what is crucial for my future success, and what role does technology play in this picture?
Definitely. You both mentioned there, you know, the growing importance of technology, but I don't know if it's the same in Germany, David, but certainly here, quite often Industry 4.0 as a buzzword has been the kind of preserve of the big companies, you know, the OEMs, the household names within manufacturing, and the smaller companies are often left behind. They're either scared of the investment or they don't have the expertise. Could this be the catalyst for quite a considerable change when it comes to the acceptance of technology? Tim or David?
I mean, it might be. I hope it will be. But the barriers that we've identified for a long time, and actually at Make UK, we're just about to go out to our members and double check and update our evidence base on this. But most research shows that there are two main barriers to uptake for IR type technologies. One is kind of awareness and technical expertise and confidence that you're making the right decision. The second always is upfront investment. And this is where I think models like relayers are really, really interesting, because, you know, right now you'll have a lot of manufacturers who really need to invest in technology and probably will start to accept that they need to do that. But their cash reserves will be even more constrained than they normally are, because they've had to use up a lot of cash just to keep going during a period of low or no orders. And so an opportunity to invest in technology, but to take it as a service and pay for it over a period of time during which you make savings, operational savings, may well be the thing that unlocks investment for those kind of companies that know they need to do it but couldn't afford it any other way.
And David, what do you say to that?
I think I can double what Tim said. An interesting guiding star could be how governments are reacting to the whole situation and how they deploy support. If you see the debate that is going on and all the big amounts that are on the table, not just in Germany, but in UK and I guess in other countries too, they really consider to invest in future, they call it future-proof businesses, right? They won't call it technology because they don't want to only foster the investment into technology because of what we already discovered, right? If you just put a plug onto your machine, it doesn't make anything to it unless there's a strong business case behind it. And I think this is what governments want to see. They want to see the business case that you're striving for, and how is it different to what you have done for the last 50 years, and why would it be future proof, and why would it be more successful? And if that then contains an investment, no one would argue the investment. And I think that is a good principle for also your own investments, in terms of think about your company strategy, where you want to lead it towards, to what role does technology play in it, and then go for this investment. Because then it's not an investment in technology, it's an investment into your business model and into your future. It just happened to be that you spent your buck on a technology.
Something you mentioned there, David, was kind of government investment, very high level investment in technology. Tim, is that something that Make UK are, obviously you have regular conversations, you lobby government on behalf of the industry. Is that something that you're kind of pushing towards, better infrastructure?
Well, I think it's greater government support to help manufacturers, particularly small and medium-sized ones, understand and take up these kinds of opportunities. We published a policy paper on this exact topic actually a week or so ago, which people can download from our website. And in it, we make 15 recommendations as to how manufacturers in the UK and the UK government and regional authorities as well can work more closely together, building on a very, very successful pilot scheme we have running in one part of England in the northwest called Made Smarter, and seeing how initiatives like that could be rolled out across the country. And in that document, we do make the point that now the need for flexibility and resilience as we rebuild and recover from this terrible crisis means the case for investing in technology and supporting manufacturers to do that is greater and stronger than before. And that's something that obviously helps manufacturers themselves, but also helps the broader economy and the country.
Definitely, yeah. David, there'll be a lot of manufacturers listening to this, especially like we mentioned before, the smaller ones who maybe haven't embraced technology quite as heavily as others, who will be looking at this and thinking, I just wouldn't know where to start. And where can they start, and how can a company like Reliant help them with that?
As I mentioned, Chris, I think it's not about going the full Monty at once. I think it's finding small milestones of success that ultimately already pays back, and then going on a journey towards digitalization that includes business transformation. So I always say one without the other doesn't make sense. So if you're just digital, but you don't do anything to your business, you will just have the same business, more digital. So if you want to gain business, if you want to do something different, then you want to start with the business strategy. So this is what manufacturers want to look at heavily, and then find a sparring partner, obviously Reliant could be one of them, to then help and identify what role technology could play and what other elements are needed. I mean, you mentioned one very important, that is cash. So cash is a very interesting element in our economy these days, because if you look into our stock market situation, it's not reacting as it should, right? So all the climate indexes are terrible, you know, unemployment rates are shooting through the roof. So basically everything should go down, but it's not, which tells you there is a lot of cash that is looking for investment. And they look for investments that they can relate to, and believe in. And this is now, I think, a great opportunity for also mid-sized companies or smaller companies to gain investments for their future if they have a sound business case to present. And if they only go on the aspect of, hey, I make my product more digital, they will miss the beat. So they really want to think about, what do I do different in terms of my go-to-market strategy, on how I monetize my assets, maybe how to also have a recurring revenue stream that make me more resilient in times like we have just experienced, and not just this transactional one-off business that I've maybe done for the past 100 years.
Tim, have you got anything you'd like to add to
that? Yes, absolutely. I mean, I entirely agree that it's really important to use this opportunity to kind of rethink your processes in order to make the best use of digital technology. But sometimes you can start small and build on from there. So maybe something as simple as digitizing part of your back office process, putting your finance department in the cloud or something like that, might give you a taster of the kind of productivity savings and resilience improvements you can get. And if you try that and it works for you, then think about more fundamental and more expensive investments in your manufacturing process itself. Personally, from talking to a lot of our members over the months, I think the thing that really helps inspire people is looking at case studies. Trade associations like ourselves can help people like Made Smarter and other technology organizations have also got a wealth of examples of people who have tried technologies and it's worked for them. So look out there for inspiration. Look on the internet, come to people like us, and we can put you in touch with people just like you who've been down this journey and can speak for themselves as to how well it's worked for them.
I think that's a very good point. It makes companies realise that they're not alone. Other companies out there will be going through exactly the same or very similar challenges to them, especially at the moment. Everyone's in the same boat, not just in the UK but across the world. So there'll be definitely companies out there that will be able to share experiences. Do you think that we've covered this in a previous one of these live panel events? looking at collaboration and industry working together a bit more, and obviously not sharing the state secrets or anything, but collaborating and being a bit more open and sharing not just their successes but also their struggles. Do you think that's something that companies and industry in general could learn from? That was him again.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think a fair amount of that does go on already. We have got some very inspirational members at Make UK who've done brilliant things with technology and are innovating all of the time, and they've been great in sharing their expertise and their experiences, and also the things that didn't work with other people. So I think the networks are there, whether it's through trade associations, whether it's through people like local enterprise partnerships or regional manufacturing networks. There are a lot of people out there talking about this sort of thing. So you're absolutely not alone. If you feel confused or don't know where to start, reach out and start networking in your area or with people doing the same thing as you.
Yeah. David, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think people do seek for a lot of use cases, also for peace of mind that others did it. But I am a true believer that first movers will be rewarded in this case. So it takes a lot of gut, and it's risky, and for sure it's something that no one exactly knows how the roadmap should look like and perfectly mapped out plan on the table. But I think those companies who have this pioneer gene, and are really interested in doing something different to their market, they will be rewarded with exponential growth, with new access to market segments that they could never access before, with growth rates that will outbeat their competitors. Because if everyone is doing what someone else already did, they will just be a copycat and find themselves in the competitive landscape again and yet again, instead of stepping out of the competitive landscape and actually tackling the market with a totally new offering that is so far ahead, and not particularly because of the product innovation, but just on the way how the product is monetized in the market. And I think with this mindset, manufacturers might find themselves that they will need to do pioneer work, and it will need a pioneer mindset, and that is not done by seeking use cases for feeling more comfort.
Sure. And that kind of feeds into the main topic of the discussion around long-term planning and resilience planning for not just a lot of manufacturers, a lot of companies in general will be looking at the next month or two and thinking we've just got to survive that. But I suppose the more successful companies will be looking 12 months, 2 years into the future. And David, what can things like servitisation and as a service models and other kind of technology, how can they help with planning for the it's more of a long-term picture, I suppose?
I think the big challenge that we will be faced with is not so much about our ability to plan, but actually define a business that will be able to adapt. So that will be the prerequisite of the future and a successful business. And I personally had 2 learnings that I found very interesting to share with. And they were more out of the consumer space, but I can envision this is moving to the manufacturing space pretty much one-to-one. So when you think about your personal behavior during lockdown, you had some subscriptions going, like your fitness club or other associations that you were part of, not necessarily using the service, but you still didn't quit. The question is, why is that, right? And there seems to be something with an ongoing fee, that is not as much bothering you as an investment. So then if you look into the investment good, for instance, of purchasing a car or buying a house, all of those things were put on hold immediately. And I think that is a great example on how the future will look like. We will see more unpredictability, more uncertainty at the horizon. It won't get clearer for sure. And with that, we need businesses that will help us and our customers and all the ecosystem players to actually adapt to this uncertainty. And I think flexible consumption systems will be the way forward. And the question is, how do I get there, right? I think that is also one of the notions that I hear throughout the webinars. How do I get started? Maybe 4 points that we usually tell our clients and prospects that they want to consider is, first of all, you need insights. So without digital insights, you will be flying blind and you can't do a data-driven decision. So even though that we are not a huge believer to connect just for the purpose of connecting, and there should be already, at the first step, some monetization, this is kind of a prerequisite you really want to have. So gathering data insights, not just data, but data insights is really important. And from there on, we can go on a journey that usually has 3 steps. One, actually, Tim already outlined. The first one is usually towards cost and effectiveness play. Is this attractive? I don't know. I think over the last decade or so, everyone tried that really hard and we squeezed all percentages out of our factory plants. So every percentage gain is still great, but the effort behind it is quite tremendous. So my take is, it's a great first step and it will pay you back and it will learn you how to master certain digital elements of your journey, but it shouldn't be a stop shop. So from there on, you should then reconsider, what can I do with my digitalization? And then we see companies going into the next phase, which is new revenue models. What does that mean? That means you are monetizing your asset differently. So you don't go full as a service. That means you give it out for free and just do consumption-based calculations. You do a certain part to it that will allow recurring revenue, such as a guarantee, a warranty, a performance promise, an SLA, where actually some certainty will be delivered to the end customer, user of the machinery, that it won't break, it doesn't need to be maintained, and all of this headache is going away, and he's willing to pay you a fee for that. So that is the first good step to go into it. And the more and more skills you acquire along this new revenue stream idea, the more and more equipped you actually are to then go full equipment as a service. Because then you are only asked with one last question, that is, when I pivot my full production line away from a transactional business to a subscription business, how do I manage the cash gap and the risk that comes with it? And that is a pretty solid exercise that you can go through as a business, but the whole journey before, you shouldn't skip. So what I'm saying is there's always a next step and a way to start, no matter where you are at the journey. And obviously we are happy to help. And I know UK manufacturers helping with educational content around it. So I think together there are enough players out there who can help make the first right step.
Tim, how long term should manufacturers be planning? I mean, using David's very interesting, very important guidance there.
Well, I think the key thing is to make sure that we learn the lessons from this crisis. None of us expected this to come. It affected all of us in uncertain ways, and it's going to have a very significant ongoing human and economic legacy. And not necessarily always a positive one, but the best way I think we can build on that is to ask ourselves, how could we be more resilient in future? How do our supply chains work? Where is our customer base? Is it diverse enough? Is our production process flexible enough? And is our consumption sustainable enough in environmental or climate change terms? And when you ask a lot of those questions, the answer does often come back to technology. So it might be, as I was talking about earlier on, how do I invest in the technology in my business that can help me be more productive and more resilient? Or it might be, as you were just saying, that if I'm manufacturing equipment and people don't have the cash to buy that at the moment, how do I use servitisation as a model to continue to be able to sell? And one of the many advantages, and I've heard this from some of our members who've already gone down this road, is, as you say, once you get over the initial cash impact of going from a pay me in full 90 days after I deliver to a service contract basis, you're actually in a much more resilient place financially, because people who've sold equipment on service contracts have been continued to be paid for that through this crisis, whether it's being used or not by the end user. Whereas those who were hoping orders in a traditional way come through have seen those decline very significantly.
That's a very interesting point. David, I guess that's another advantage. It's it's guaranteed up to a point, guaranteed as much as you can guarantee anything nowadays. Guaranteed income, guaranteed custom, guaranteed cash flow, regardless of what the economic situation is, as opposed to having to rely on selling assets or equipment as a tangible thing. And I guess that's another advantage.
within all the servitization, you will see one thing happening, that is everyone tries to push their personal risk somewhere else. I think this is the whole thing about the exercise, right? I don't want to have the risk of owning the asset. I don't want to take the risk of making this investment. I don't want to take the risk of having it 10 years on my books and doing the depreciation. So all those risks are not welcomed, and you actually don't need them in terms of being a successful company. So that's what actually the people are looking for the relief of all this risk and someone taking it. And I think there are two major points to it. So number one, you need to be a company that mastered all the elements that are around this risk in terms of, how do I maintenance my asset? How do I monitor it? How do I predict the behavior of it? So once you're in that space, you're already halfway there to make that call. And secondly, I think those companies will be particularly successful that will then intelligently push the risk into the financial markets. So if they keep it on their books, and keep it as their entrepreneurial risk, they can do that. It's a very brave way on running it. But if you even want to gain more resilience, there are ways in risk management to actually push it into the financial markets or risk insurance companies. So there's a lot of places where this risk can be managed, and either it's the financial risk or the real life risk that can be managed. And people and the companies particularly who will look into this risk element of it, I think they will have a big advantage in their thinking process, in their servitization approach.
And that, I suppose, goes back to our earlier discussion around mindset and how you identify the risks. Will that have to change? Will the risks of the start of 2020 be different to the risks of today or 6 months' time? David will.
So for me, the risks will stay the same, because the major risk that the people do feel and try to align against is uncertainty. Right, so they don't know the behavior of their customers. They don't know how their business will do. They don't know how the machinery will do. They just don't know, and this uncertainty is a leading element in this movement. So I think this is something that people desperately would like to go away, but it won't. So now it's about those people who can handle the uncertainty the best, who will win and gain an advantage there.
Tim, I don't know if you've got anything to say around identifying risks and how they might change.
Well, I think what this has done is force everyone to take a long, hard look at their supply chains and their customer base. I don't think people particularly were doing that before, or to the extent to which they probably could have been. But any manufacturer, the vast majority of our members certainly tell us that they are in the process of reviewing their supply chains and their customer bases in order to make sure they are more diverse and more resilient. And so that, I think, is a direct impact of the current COVID-19 crisis. And one of the things we're really encouraging people to do as they go through that sort of review is to take the opportunity to think about how technology can improve the resilience of their supply chains and support their businesses. Because it would be a really missed opportunity if people just go through the process and don't take into account where we are 4.0 and things that can be done. And the example I usually point to is kind of a very, very relevant. We also months ago to produce enough ventilators for the NHS, and we couldn't buy the ones we needed from abroad because production had already been bought up by other people. UK manufacturers came together to build the product in the UK, but they were missing critical components they needed, which would normally come from China and which weren't available. And they turned to technology, additive manufacturing technology in this instance, to produce those components here in order to make up for a broken supply chain. And that, I think, was a really, really good example of how technology can help improve resilience and mean that the traditional ways we thought about supply chains may no longer be 100% accurate.
Definitely, yeah. I think, supply chains, as you just said, Tim, are not necessarily a very weak link in manufacturers' processes. If your supplier in China, for whatever reason, can't supply the parts, then you've got a big problem potentially. And the previous panel that I referred to earlier, which looked at collaboration, was looking at the ventilator challenge that you just mentioned there, Tim, and how they've had to work together and find new ways of sourcing parts. David, I'll turn to you to kind of expand on Tim's point really about the supply chain, and I'm sure it's the same over in Germany and across the world. Supply chains aren't what they were 3 or 4 months ago. That no one can be sure when they'll be able to get their parts, where they'll be able to get them from. So do you think bringing supply chains kind of closer to home, and either 3D printing or additive manufacturing, or using a supplier in the same town or in the same country, as opposed to one from China or the other side of the world, do you think that's something that will change? And how can technology play a part in that?
Yeah, that's a very valid point, Chris. I think we will see a lot of shake-ups in the supply chains across the world. We've seen that on many occasions. I personally, not so drastic as an example, but for instance, Germany is running out of bikes. So apparently the good weather, made people think about, hey, maybe I want to buy a bike. We didn't know that 80 or 90% of all frames are produced in Asia. And then also the parts like brakes and stuff usually come from Japan. So suddenly there was no supply, and all the bike stores, had huge demand but couldn't fulfill it. So they actually opened their stores just to let people know that they can't deliver for the next unknown weeks, which put them into a very sad and bad place, right? So we will definitely see a lot of shake-ups in the supply chain. On the manufacturing space, I think it will be leading to 2 things. Number one, the people will consider the place in their ecosystem. So what usually our competitors maybe will become partners or peers. They maybe want to do something together or differently, but for sure nothing will stay as it is. And secondly, what I really like of the idea of supply chain is there's always a giving end and a receiving end, and both will take different opinions about how they want to run their business, and they need to harmonize it, otherwise it won't work. So, if a supplier now goes, hey, I will just do equipment as a service for you, but he's actually giving, bike frames that are supposed to then end up at the customer, that won't work, because the customer wants to own his bike. So that is obviously a dead end, and the interest of the supply chain is not aligning. I think when the interest of the supply chain is aligning throughout, then it will be becoming a very resilient and very powerful supply chain. So the player within the supply chain, I think, will need to have different dialogues. They will need to be more eye height, not so much top down as they maybe used to be in some parts of the business. And that will be a very interesting experience and a liberating experience, I think, for a lot of players, that they will be heard, and that new ideas that would have been labeled crazy, in the past, might actually come to fruition. So that is a very exciting time ahead. But it will need a lot of dialogue, moderation, and also, drive in terms of execution.
Mm-hmm. And I guess as we're running out of time, we might as well kind of get the crystal ball out and look to the future. Exactly, Tim. If we were to sit down in a couple of years' time and reflect on this conversation and the ongoing scenario, what would you like to see in terms of digitalization of industry? Where would you like manufacturing to be in a couple of years' time when it comes to embracing technology?
Well, the last time we surveyed our members, which was a couple of years ago now, manufacturers roughly split a third. A third hadn't really started down the road of the 4th Industrial Revolution. A third were thinking about it, and a third were doing something about it. And of that third that were doing something about it, only a really small percent, 4 or 5%, had delivered revolutionary transformation. When we look back in 2 years' time, I'd like to see those numbers really transformed. I'd like every manufacturer, whatever size, to accept that the digitalization of manufacturing is something that is relevant for them, and that if they want to have a thriving competitive business, is something they're going to have to engage with. And I would like to see a much greater percentage of our manufacturers of all shapes and sizes in all sectors having got to that truly transformational stage, having really thought properly about their business, changed their processes, and unlocked a step change in productivity, quality, and resilience.
And David, how about you? What would you and Relaya like to see?
I personally would love to see a bit more decentralization. I think the forces over time really centralized into a few players that became system critical, as well as in a position of slowing down innovation and just doing the business as they've done it for thousands of years. And I think now it's a great opportunity that those forces get shaked up, you know, that there's a redistribution in terms of market share, that new innovations crawl up. And I hope that those come to fruition, come to success, and will build resilient businesses throughout. So that would be something that I hope of. Secondly, I also would hope that people and the manufacturing business particularly would see the Industry 4.0 as what it is, as an operating system. It's nothing else, right? There are components, hardware to it and software to it, but it's an operating system, which is pretty boring. So it comes with paint, you know, it comes with a notepad, but other than that, it doesn't do an awful lot to you. So they need to come with the great ideas to build up on this operating system. So also we from Relaya, I mean, we are the digitalization experts, and we do know an awful lot about technology, but not so much about manufacturing. So we actually do seek those pioneers with the great ideas that do want to build something on this operating system that then puts them into a very competitive advantage and a great place for future success. And this is what we would love to help.
Sure. And if companies are interested in helping you out, what's the best way to get in touch? Is it via your website or?
Well, as a person of marketing, we have a fabulous website, right? So please go. But sure, we do have offices around the world, also in the UK. So we will get in touch with you personally if we can. Otherwise, Zoom is a great technology, as we just learned over the last weeks. You know, we can't get enough of our daily Zoom binge watching. So we will take any request and inquiry on the channel of your choice.
Sure. Great. Well, I think, you know, out of every crisis comes a great opportunity, and I think this is a perfect opportunity to really transform the way manufacturers across the world operate and look at how they work, not just in their factory, but as we've discussed, further down their supply chain and even further beyond that. I thank you both very much for your time. It's been a really interesting and quite inspirational conversation. And to everybody watching, please stay safe, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you all very much.